Hello friends, welcome to my channel, a channel for learning simple coding. If you find this video to be helpful, please like, share and subscribe my channel. From this video I am starting a new project. It's called Counter project. Counter project is very famous in React. We understand so many concepts by using this counter application. So because everybody know counter project, so I am taking this counter project to understand the Redux Toolkit also, and in place of React I am using React Native. So in React Native I am going to implement the Redux Toolkit, the latest one. So how we can use the Redux Toolkit in React Native, that we are going to understand in these projects, and we are also going to understand what is the requirement of the Redux Toolkit, why we need this. So we are going to understand with the help of counter project. So you see that we have a simple project in which if I click on this plus button, then it increment the value, and if I click on the minus button, then it decrement the value. So it's a simple counter project that everybody knows in React. Those are coming on this video. So I'm taking a simple example to understand it. You see that here I have a use state. Everybody knows that use state we use to manage a state of an component. So this counter is a component. We have this count as a state property here, and with the help of use state we are maintaining this because it will update dynamically with the help of use state. So this counter have their own state. Remember that it's a local state, it is not a global state. And if you know React, you understand also that this local state nobody can update, means only counter component can update, other component cannot update the local state of any component, that we understand. So here we have this counter decrement method, we have increment method, and with the help of these buttons we are just incrementing and decrementing. Some CSS I have used just to make some look and feel. So it's a very simple to understand. So here I already made this counter component, because if I start from the scratch and from the beginning, then the length of the video will increase. So I want to make you understand the concept why we need React Toolkit. So I need this ready-made component counter. Now I will make one more component, and that component will use 5 counter components. You see that I create one more component here, and I give the name to total component, total counter. So I give the name total counter here, and here I create this component, and I want to use 5 times this counter component. So I just use here, remember I just remove this from here, and here I use counter component 5 times. Save this. So I copy this 5 times. Remember that 4 times. I just copy it 4 times, and this counter 4 times I am copying here, and I open app also, and I change here counter to total counter. I want to start the application from total counter now. Total counter under the YouTube folder, and I just remove this. And you see that because of this counter component, because I have this counter component and I have used 4 times this counter component. So you see I want to increment and decrement all these value, and you see that these 4 counters have their own state. Remember that this counter have their own state, means 4 times I am using this counter component, each and every counter have their own state here. But I want to change now. I want to manage the state of all the counter in total counter component, means I do not want that each and every counter have their own state, because I cannot control the state of individual component from the total counter. We know that we can't change the state of any local component by the outer or inner component. Remember that. So I need to create my own state here, and then I need to pass the property to this counter to manage the state. Remember, so I am making some modification for that. So what I do, I create here my own state. So I say here const, and here I say like this. We have here on state count and set counter. So here I am creating my on state and I say counter. So I say counters and set counters, remember, like this. And here I say use state, and here type would be of counter type. I say counter type, and this would be the array, like this, that I want to manage. So I create here, I say interface, and I create here interface, and I say id to the number, then I say count to the number. Save this. Interface name is date count type, like this. So I have this interface and I have count type, this counter type, not count type, counter type. So this is the counter type here. Use state we have to import here, so I say use state. Save this. So counters and set counters we have, remember, and here I need to initialize the initial counter value. So I create this also. So I say here id equal to 1, count equal to, we can initialize from 0. Then I copy this and I paste it for 3 times, and I say id number 2 is there, id number 3 is there, id number 4 is there. Save this, and we need to create it as a array, like this. So we create this. Now I have this id and I have an initial value to 0 to all the counter, and I change the value to 3 also for one counter. Now with the help of this state variable, I create number of counters. So I remove this first of all, remember this, and here I need this counter dot map function, and here I need each and every item for this. So I say count item, or this is my counter also. So I say counter, and here I need this counter. I cut this and I paste it here, remember, and save this. Here this counter is there and I need this counter, so I create first of all key. So I pass counter dot id as a key also. Then I say id of this counter, so I pass it here, counter dot id. Then I say count, then I say count property, and I pass counter dot count. So these are the value that I am going to pass, remember, to the counter. Remember, I am just creating 4 state individually here for 4 counter, and each and every state I am maintaining from the total counter. That we have to do because we have to make it centralized state for the counters. Now I need to manage this state, that's why I am giving here export. Remember, I am exporting this interface, and here in counter I import this, import, and I say a counter type, like this. Save this, and I create here type of this. So I say interface, and I say props type here, and in this props type I say id to number, count to number, same I need counter type. This is props type, so no need of this to declare here. I can directly pass to here. I say props, and I say counter type. Yeah, no need to pass it here, no need to create again and again, because same counter type I have already. Now I just remove this one. Why? Because no need to manage the state here. I don't need these function also, remember. So I make it comment also, no need to create this function here. Now this count will become props dot count, and these increment and decrement I will use after a short while. So I remove this, and right now I just do like that, just to run it without any error. So I am passing this one. Save this. You see that I am passing the value from the total counter to the counter. Remember that, because I am going to maintain the state of this counter by the total counter, that is the parent component. Now because I am managing the state of this counter child component, by the total counter, that child component counter is called controlled component. So now counter is become controlled component, and you see initial value 3 I am passing from here. So we have 3. If I change to 2 here and I save it, then it will become 2. You see that I am able to manage the state of counter by this total counter. That we have to do if we are not using Redux Toolkit. I am going to make you understand that what is the use of this. Now you see that these increment and decrement functions are not working because the state of these counter is available in total counter, and here in total counter we have to perform the calculation for incrementing and decrementing. It's not possible by the counter. So I copy this to function, I cut this, remember, and I paste this function here after this. So I will create the component here. Remember, I am just explaining you what is the difficulties to maintain these state by using use state. And you see that now the problem is that we have to decrement and increment from here, and we have to call this function here. So what we have to do, first of all, we have to pass from here the increment and decrement. So I create one property, I say decrement, and I pass it here decrement like this. Similarly, I say increment and I need to pass it here increment. You see, so these modification I need to pass here also, remember, because I need this also. So here I need to make a change in the property of this also. Now what I can do, I need to create separate now, because the problem is I can't merge this. So I create one, I say props type interface props type, and here I say id is number, I say count is number, and I say then increment is a function, remember, that will return a void, then decrement. These are the changes which we have to do to make it workable like this. Now in place of counter I say props type, remember, and no need of this type because already we have declared separately. Now you see we have this increment and decrement. So here I can call it, I say props dot decrement button is there, and we have to pass here id of the component, or we can pass the component counter also. So here with the help of id we can't do this. So props dot count, we have id also. Now you see that problem is there. How we will identify this, which component we want to increment and decrement? For that we need separate property. I need to pass counter here. So in place of these property, here I say counter, remember, and this is counter type. So I say import, again I say counter type I need, and here I say counter type. You see, so I need to pass here counter, and this is counter type. Remember, we have to change something, that's why only then we will be able to do this. So I need to pass from here, I need to pass here counter, and I need to pass here counter like this. No need of count this also, you see. So these are the changes which we have to make according to the requirement if we want to manage a global state. Remember that I want to maintain this state from the total counter. Now this property is changed to counter dot count, this one, and here I want to decrement, so I need to pass counter here, props dot counter. So this counter I need to pass, this one I need to pass, and this property I need to explain here that I need to pass counter of counter type. Remember, this I need to pass again here. These are the changes that we need to make changes to understand that how we are maintaining the state of this by total counter. Remember that we are just making a change to manage the state from the outer component. These are the difficulties to do this, that's I am going to explain you. So this we have done, and again we have to do increment also. So I say props dot increment, and here I need to pass props dot counter, save this, and you see that this is just calling a method. It is not the possible now to increment and decrement, generate error. So we have to find out here the counter. So I say here counter is coming of counter type. Remember, this is counter type counter. Same we have here counter of counter type that we are getting from here. Remember, we are passing the counter here in this method, and this method having this counter here. So now we need to perform the increment and decrement operations. So how we will perform? It's also difficult task. So first of all, I create a local counter. I say local counters, then I create the copy of original counter. So I say counters like this, original copy of that counter. Then I need to find out the index of the counter which we are going to increment and decrement. So I say local counter dot index of, and I pass here counter. Remember, so I find out the index of this counter. Then by using this local counter, and here I pass index of this counter, that count property of this I do increment because decrement, because the decrement property. Then I set counters and I modify this counter by the local counter. Remember that. Same I have to do for increment the value. Save this. So copy this first of all and then save this, and in place of minus minus I do plus plus. Now I try to do, we have to restart once again because it's showing some problem. So we have to restart it again to manage the states. Now we try to do, you see increment is working, you see increment is working now, you see increment is working, decrement is also working, you see decrement is also working. So you need to understand that here we have only two components, total counter and counter, and I'm managing the state in total counter of this counter, and because of this I have this complicated code. Remember that, and try to understand it by this PPT. What we are doing, you see that we have right now we have this total counter component. This total counter have their own local state, or we can say have their own store. So this store cannot be shared by other component because of the React rules and regulation. So this counter component we have inside a total counter. So this counter is a child of total counter. So we can pass property state as a property. So we can pass this state of total counter as a property to the counter. It's very simple. It's very easy also. So here in this condition we have only one child under total counter. So it's easy to pass the function. As we pass increment and decrement, we pass id, counters, everything we pass in this example, and because we have only one child. But if scenario change, suppose we have like this, remember, now in place of one child under this total counter, in some application situation, suppose we have component 1, 2, 3, under that we have a counter component, then we have to pass the state from total counter to component 1, then from component 1 to component 2, from component 2 to component 3, then from component 3 to counter. Remember that if we have only 4 or 5 components, then it is very complicated to maintain the state and to change something in the state. And with the help of this counter application, you can imagine in your mind that we have only few components in this application, and it's very complicated to manage. In my example, I took only one child under the total counter, and you see that we have to make so many changes and increment decrement function, and now code become complicated. But if we have this scenario, the under so many component we have to pass this property, it's very hectic to manage all the operations. So it's a very big drawback in React. We have to perform like this. The solution of this is Redux Toolkit. Remember that solution of this is React Toolkit, because a professional application have thousands of components, so it is not possible to pass the value from outer component till the last 1000 component, and we have to make a one change and then we have to modify each and every component because of that change. It's very difficult to maintain. So now the modern way of doing this is like this. You see, we have to change this application according to this. Here you imagine yourself that this counter component have their own state. So in place of on state, we will create a global state. So this React toolkit will create a global store or a state that would be shared by each and every component. Here in this example, you see that total counter can also access this. Counter is also able to access this. Component 1 can access this, component 2 can access, component 3 can access, component counter component can access. Means each and every component from your application have direct access to this React toolkit global store. Remember that. So we will make a global state by using React toolkit, and then we will do some things that is required to maintain this state, like we will create a store, we will make provider, we will make a slices, and we will understand what is the use of actions, what is the use of reducers. Each and everything we will see with the help of this counter application. But you need to understand that why we using React toolkit, because each and every component in React Native or React have their own local state. So this state cannot be modified by any other component. We need to pass the property of state as a props to the component. If the props are as a simple child, then it's easy to maintain. But if number of components are there, inside this we have the component, we need to pass state as the props to all the components. It's not easy to maintain. That's why we need to create a global state that every component from your application and can access directly, and it can make modification, it can access this global state variables and do whatever the application requirement is. So remember here that if we have two components, then it's very simple to maintain it. But if we have such kind of complications in application, then it's better to maintain a global state, and global state can be shared by each and every component. So we understand from this example that why we need this Redux toolkit, and we modified the application counter application as per the requirement. But you see the complication of the code is increased here, and we have also, you see, made the local state for total counter. That state we are transferring as a props to this component. It's a simple one component inside total counter component. Then it's very easy to maintain or use this function, but inside so number of components, it's not easy to maintain it. So now in the next video we will see how can we maintain and how can we convert this application total counter and counter to use the Redux toolkit, and we will understand how we can modify this application according to the React toolkit. One by one we will see in number of videos how to modify this and how we can make this application again workable by using some modification. We will create here reset button also. We will delete this, but we will create a delete button also for deleting individual component, and we will show number of active components also. Each and everything we will do, and we will understand with the help of global state by using React toolkit. I think you understand now from this application what is counter application and how to make this counter application in React Native, and we will also understand now why we need React toolkit in our application. In next video we start to learn React toolkit also. If you learn something from this video, please do subscribe. Thank you for watching this video.